Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to give it another minute before we get started. And so while we're waiting, I invite you to share your name in the chat and also the organization or municipality that you're with. And if you care to share what brings you to today's event, we're thrilled that you're here. Good afternoon. We will give it one more minute to get started since we know there's still some folks coming in out of the wait room. I'm Katherine Antos with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And while we are waiting, please go ahead and place your name in the chat as well as the organization or municipality that you're here with and what brings you to today's event. Thanks. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar on a new report from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, Land Economy Opportunity, Industrial Land Supply and Demand in Greater Boston. Before we dive deeper into industrial land use in our region, please note that this webinar is being recorded. If you prefer not to have your face recorded, you are welcome to turn off your video. The Boston region has a growing economy and population, and conversations are underway across municipal, regional, and state levels to manage and leverage that growth. Industrial sectors have been a part of the regional economy throughout Boston's history, but recently industrial land use has been diminishing, while demand is increasing by users such as e-commerce distribution centers. The outmigration of industrial land uses away from transit access increases distances both workers and goods need to travel, even making workers unable to access industrial jobs. This strains our transportation infrastructure and increases congestion and air pollution as well. Many municipalities attending today are making difficult decisions about preserving or converting industrial land to other uses, including important housing considerations. There is good reason to strategically consider preserving industrial land as well for the quality job opportunities industrial businesses provide, as well as maintaining a diverse economy. This report supports MAPC's work to advance two of the goals within Metro Common 2050, our regional plan for Greater Boston. The first is economic security, in which everyone has the financial resources to meet their needs and lead fulfilling lives. And the second is economic prosperity, in which Greater Boston's economy benefits all in the region. Land Economy Opportunity has been a two-year collaborative effort across several of MAPC's economic development, data services, transportation, strategic initiatives, and communications departments. And we are joined by several of the contributors today, including Angela Brown, Jesse Partridge, and Camille Jonlin. I also want to recognize the contributions of current and former MAPC staff members and primary authors Sukanya Sharma and Josh Eichen, as well as Sandy Johnston, formerly with the Central Transportation Planning staff. Finally, this research would not be possible without funding from the Barr Foundation. And without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Camille Jonlin, Economic Development Planner 2, here with MAPC to present today's study.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katherine, for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm happy to present Land Economy Opportunity, Industrial Land Supply and Demand in Greater Boston. So the purpose of this project, one, as Katherine mentioned, is to achieve the goals of Metro Common 2050, in particular, supporting economic security and prosperity of regional residents and workers. So we chose to study this critical economic sector. We see from the research literature that healthy manufacturing, employment, and ecosystems are tied to greater regional economic resilience and innovation. We see that the revitalization of American industry is critical to building the middle class and equalizing wage disparities, which is of great import in the Boston region. And it enables inclusive economic development for communities of color and supports well-paying jobs for workers across the board. So overall, the research literature shows that deterioration of an industrial base and displacement of businesses that ensues can lead to several things, including damaging regional economic strength, pricing smaller firms out of the area, and disproportionately impacting workers of color, workers without college degrees, and workers whose first language is not English. So we've decided to study this sector through shifting land use and how those land use changes impact industrial businesses and jobs. The primary data for this study comes from assessors' records of land parcels, from CoStar, which is a built space database, and the American Community Survey Public Use Microdata Sample, known as ACS PUMS, as well as labor and wages data from the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, known as ES202 data. So to provide an overview of the industrial sector as it stands today in the Boston region, first we define industrial not just as manufacturing, as some may assume, but really as production, distribution, and repair sectors. So this can include construction, manufacturing, both light and heavy production, wholesale trade, transportation and warehousing, logistics, and repair and maintenance. So as you see on this map of the MAPC region here in dark purple are the existing industrial land parcels. There are approximately 30,600 acres of existing industrial land, which accounts for 3.3% of the developed or potentially developable land in the MAPC region. You see concentrations of this north of the inner core being the light blue color on the map, as well as south and southwest of the inner core. So this is a map of community types within the MAPC region, the blue being the inner core, pink being maturing suburbs, orange being developing suburbs. And then what I'd like to call out is the green turquoise color, which is regional urban centers. So proportionately, we see concentrations of industrial space in these regional urban centers. These sometimes coincide with gateway cities, such as Peabody. They are, in some cases, historical clusters of industrial land, such as textiles and Lowell. And these are areas where the industrial jobs are critical to economic vitality. We also see workers commuting from other types of spaces to these regional urban centers for industrial jobs. For example, the Cherry Hill Industrial Park in Beverly employs close to 1/3 of workers from Lynn, Lawrence, and Lowell. So although it may seem by rhetoric and in reality that industrial land is leaving the region, we still do have this strong industrial base today. In terms of the trends in industrial space over the last decade or so, we have seen a 10.9 million square foot net loss of built space in the MAPC region, which is about 3.5% of the region's total inventory as of 2011. So this is CoStar data, which only speaks to the built space rather than land parcels more broadly. As you see on this map here in the darker orange color, that's where the most space loss has occurred. So the inner core of the Boston metro area has seen almost 75% of the loss of industrial space. And other regions in the green here have seen some increases in industrial space, but not as much as the loss in other areas. Vacancy rates, however, have declined between 2011 and 2021 from 11% to 4.4%. So Interestingly enough, when taking into account this declining vacancy rate, there is actually more space in use now compared to 2011. We see that this loss over time is likely due to conversion to highest and best use. So recognizing that sectors such as housing or e-commerce may have higher land values, this is leading to displacement or redevelopment of industrial land. And I would like to recognize, as Katherine mentioned, the great need for housing in this region. But there are strategies that we'll mention in the recommendations to preserve the industrial land at the same time as meeting housing needs. At the same time as this, some loss may be due to growth in rents. So across the region, the median rent increased for industrial spaces increased 36%. And just in the inner core, that rent increase was 41% between 2011 and 2021. So this movement outwards, this displacement of industrial businesses can have several consequences, including decreasing proximity for those businesses to the workforce, to consumers, to suppliers, and to transportation, which increases pollution, trucks on the road, congestion. Further research into this would disaggregate the displacement in industrial land by specific industry type. So we see that large logistics firms, international logistics firms are taking up more industrial space, but it would be interesting to look more into which types of businesses are being displaced because of that. There are significant workforce implications due to this changing industrial land. So we chose to look into these sectors here, seeing as 62% of workers without college degrees in the MAPC region are in these sectors, the non-industrial ones, the industrial sectors of wholesale trade, manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, construction and repair, and compared those to the non-industrial sectors of accommodation and food service and retail trade. So there are more employees overall in accommodation and food service and retail trade. But as you see by this chart here, the median wage for workers without a college degree is $12,000 to $22,000 higher per year for these industrial jobs than non-industrial sectors. So along with this really significant wage difference, industrial jobs are quality jobs in that they provide good benefits, they provide union opportunities, and they provide opportunities for career pathways and wage advancement. To look at some racial implications of this as well, the industrial sectors on average employ 28% workers of color, which is among the highest of industries in the region. And when comparing folks without a college degree, white workers have median earnings $5,000 to $27,000 more per year than workers of color in the same industry. So this is a significant racial earnings gap within these industrial sectors. When removing positions such as upper management and only accounting for the physical production activities that are the core of industrial jobs, the racial pay gap shrinks somewhat. I'd like to provide a case study of another region that has strategically looked at their industrial land and how to protect and preserve it. So this is a case study of London. The London Plan is London's 2021 master plan, and it is a strategy to retain, enhance, and manage industrial sites for economic resilience. This is a coordinated approach to collaboratively monitor that land. Specifically, as you see here in the maroon color, are London's designated SILs, strategic industrial locations. So these are an inventory of the largest concentrations of industrial land, and they are carefully managed to support the functioning of London's economy. So they include uses ranging from utilities to waste management, light and heavy manufacturing, storage spaces, all sorts of necessary spaces for industrial use. London desires to protect these spaces for the functioning of the economy, and they have listed some development alternatives in order to support this continued land use by industrial businesses, recognizing that costs and land pressures are increasing. So one development alternative is intensification, which is basically building up, such as building mezzanines or multi-story warehouses. Another strategy is co-location, which is mixing industrial use with residential or commercial uses. So this is particularly used for industrial uses that do not produce pollution, noise, toxins in the air, that sort of thing. And the London plan, if you look at it carefully, does provide some suggestions for how to do that. And then finally, the third development alternative is less a development alternative and more substitution, recognizing that because of these increasing costs and land pressures, relocation outside the city is the only option for some industrial businesses. But overall, recognizing these strategic industrial locations helps London to strategically manage transit, supply chains, pollution, and jobs to serve the city, to serve these small and mid-sized industrial businesses. So finally, we have some recommendations from this report that are for municipal stakeholders, for regional stakeholders, in planning and economic development and policymaking spaces. Our first recommendation is to integrate industrial land use planning into master plans and economic development planning processes. So this, like London, can include establishing a baseline inventory of the local stock of industrial land and the businesses and the workers who are utilizing that land. We recommend utilizing land use tools such as zoning and permitting to combat real estate pressures on industrial land. So for instance, this can include limiting non-industrial uses like housing and like big box retail in industrial areas to maintain that availability and affordability for industrial businesses. We recommend creating incentives for the development of light industrial space and mixed use developments. This harkens back to London's co-location recommendation. So examples of this can include artisanal shops, research and development, repair firms, food production, such as butchers and breweries, other types of light manufacturing that can coexist with other types of spaces. We recommend considering transportation needs when planning and permitting industrial spaces. So this includes site design that's conducive to transit, travel, bicycling, excuse me, for environmentally friendly ways for workers to access sites. And we recommend considering transportation management areas for larger sites. Finally, we recommend establishing regional or sub-regional economic development collaboration to retain and grow in the industrial base in order to bolster those well-paying jobs, bolster those accessible jobs in the region, and continue the economic strength and economic diversity of the Boston metro area. So further research is plentiful in this space. We recommend looking into specific zoning tools and strategies for mixed use developments. We recommend transit analyses that connect industrial parks and workers. And we recommend regional strategies to balance land priorities such as housing. And with that, thank you for listening to this presentation. I look forward to the panel discussion, and I'm happy to take a few questions if there are any in the chat from the audience.
We don't have any questions in the chat yet, but folks should please feel free to add any questions you do have about the research before we start the panel.
And if there are no questions now, I can jump in at the end of the panel Q&A if you'd like to ask your questions then. So I guess with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Angela Brown, the MAPC Chief of Economic Development, to present our panel discussion.
Thank you, Camille. Thank you for that tremendous presentation. You stepped us through quite a lot of information that I'm happy to share this and provide it in much more detail in the written report that will be forthcoming after this webinar event. Hi, everybody. My name is Angela Brown, and I'm Chief of Economic Development here at MAPC. In the Economic Development team, we work with municipalities, local towns and cities in the 101 communities in and around Boston with nonprofit partners and other institutions on a variety of projects. And that can include land use plans for commercial, industrial, and mixed use districts, initiatives on skills training and employment access, a topic near and dear to our hearts on today's panel, as well as business support initiatives and more. So just wanted to leave that thought as the economic development team is here to work with any of you. I'm super excited that we have a tremendous panel today. We're going to hear more detailed introductions soon, but we're really pleased and delighted to have with us Professor of City and Regional Planning, Jamal Green of the University of Pennsylvania Weitzman School of Design. We have Ms. Tori Katsourbas Stam, the co-owner of Katsourbas Brothers, which is a very interesting firm that does food distributions. And then we have Carl Allen, the economic development planner for the city of Chelsea, one of the inner core cities very close to Boston. Very interesting place, and is going to speak to local efforts there in Chelsea. So to start us out, if I could turn to you, Professor Jamal Green, could you briefly introduce yourself and tell us about the study that you did of industrial preservation in various parts of the United States? What do you see as the significance of industrial lands in various metropolitan areas? The fact that some of them do have an industrial base? And in the areas that you looked at, what was their significance to their regional economies? Thanks.
Indeed, thank you again. Again, my name is Jamal Green. I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of City and Regional Planning, Weitzman School of Design, University of Pennsylvania. As part of my dissertation, I looked at industrial land use policies across the US. To kind of like answer your first question there, I reviewed the comp plans and zoning codes of the 50 largest cities in the United States by population in 2012. I identified 11 cities as having some kind of like protective industrial land policy. And the way that I had defined that was basically like the policy had to be distinct and new. So it couldn't just be an existing industrial land use zone. And there was kind of like a discursive element, right? So the framing of industrial land within the policy had to be like more positive or neutral, right? In traditional language around industrial lands are often framed, like as a nuisance land use, right? But with these new sets of policies, industrial lands are framed as strategic assets that need to be managed and in certain cases preserved or even grown, right? So again, I found 11 cities there. The cities use a variety of strategies. They primarily have a mixture of either having just like more stringent use restrictions or greater process steps that people have to take if they're trying to convert a piece of land to a non-industrial use that happens to be within their protective zones. And again, across the country, the combination of those two varies wildly. Closer to home in Massachusetts there, the state of Massachusetts they have what they call designated port areas that are connected to the Federal Coastal Zone Management Act, going all the way back to 1978, which is really built around preserving maritime uses. And what we find for a lot of these policies actually is that there are a good number that are either there to protect maritime or waterfront uses, or one of the initial pushes for the policy as a whole was to protect land for freight and logistics. So I won't go too much more into detail on that. In terms of the other question, in looking at the broad employment patterns across cities, what I found at the time, looking from 2005 to 2015, is that the conventional wisdom that cities, have lost all their manufacturing employment is partially true, yes, but manufacturing is not the whole of industrial land uses and employment. And actually, when you track overall industrial employment, net of manufacturing, something like half of the largest cities in the country actually had positive employment growth from 2005 to 2015, right? And that actually flies like in the face of how people really think, of how people consider like urban industrial employment and growth, right? And we would expect those numbers to continue to kind of grow at a healthy pace with the rise in demand for more warehouse spacing and at-home delivery and things like that. So, long story short, our cities are still places of like very vibrant, diverse economies, and industry has a place within them, both including and not including manufacturing. And the burden is on our cities and regions to really take a hard look at our industrial lands and to view them as the assets and job and wealth generators that they are, and not just as these nuisances that are waiting to be converted to condos.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jamal. So really a great framing and kind of call to action for all of us. Thank you for that. Turning to you, Tori Katsarubis-Stam, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We know you're a busy person with a company that you run. Can you tell us a little bit about Katsarubis Brothers' history in the Boston region? Also talk a little bit about what you do at the company, but also share with us a little bit how changes in where the company has been located within Boston over the years, and how did you really navigate competition for and the high cost of industrial real estate?
Sure. So if anyone's in the Boston area, I always say, like, I'm Tori Katsarubis Brothers, and no one knows who I am. And then I'll say, well, the big green trucks with the long name and the produce on the back, and then people are like, oh, I've seen those trucks. So we've been in Boston for 110 years. My brother and I are the 4th generation owners. We started on Blue Hill Ave in Roxbury, when my grandfather came over in the 1900s, and kind of grew from there and made our home in Newmarket Square for 30 years, which is in Roxbury neighborhood in Boston. And very much wanted to stay in Newmarket Square. We rebuilt from 5,000 square feet to 24,000 in 2006, and that was our home. And we kept growing, and we kept being able to, it's this perfect location. So what we do is we distribute food to restaurants and nursing homes and hospitals. So we're the person in between a manufacturer or a farmer that brings food. We move food. So we move food throughout New England. And where we were in Newmarket Square, could go north and south and east and west, and it was so perfect, but we could not move. We were really landlocked in there. And so the choice was, what most of our neighbors did was like, well, this is as big as our business is going to be, because there's no way you can stay in Boston if there's no place to go. So for 5 years, my brother and I just like desperately talked to everyone and we could find in Boston and try to find a new location. We really were very passionate about keeping our workforce intact. The vast majority of our employees, we employ about 200 people now, and Boston and Chelsea are definitely about 70% of our employees come there, and they were completely the heart of our business. So we were so dedicated to staying within Boston. So it took us about 5 years to find a location in Hyde Park that is an industrial park. And there was, we could do a build out there, and we had public transportation, we could get shuttles for people from Chelsea. And so it really ended up being, I think it was divine intervention, because like literally you could not find a place. If you wanted to stay in Boston, it was next to impossible. Coming into Boston was, unless you were really, boots on the ground and could find something off the beaten path, it was very difficult to do. And we've been rooted here for so long. So even for us, it was hard. And we would watch the square footage. We owned our building in New Market Square, and we were able to get some partners to buy our building in Hyde Park. But, we've watched the base value of a square footage go from $6 when I first started with my dad to it's over $30 now. And so moving into Hyde Park and being able to be an owner there, it was like we gave ourselves a lot of runway, and we're able to keep our whole workforce and move them from Roxbury to Hyde Park and keep growing. So yeah, we just tried. At the time we did it, we were very welcomed in Hyde Park because no one wanted Amazon. So it was like the family business coming in. They were like, yes, and people were really nice to us. So I feel like we try to be a good neighbor, just because we're just such a Boston rooted company. But yeah.
Thank you, Tori. We're going to come back to the good neighbor aspects in a moment, but really hearing your passion about staying connected and located in Boston. Hyde Park, for folks that don't know, is a little bit further out from sort of the central part of the core of Boston, where Newmarket is. So some pushing out, but not leaving the city. So thank you for that example. Coming around to you, Carl Allen, as an economic development planner for the city of Chelsea. Would you be able to, and welcome it, by the way, and thank you for your work for the city of Chelsea. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about the city's economic development strategy? Is Chelsea sort of proactively doing things with its industrial lands? Does that include modifying land use policies for industrial sites or some other type of preservation strategy? Please share your thoughts. Oh, you're still on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you for having us. So Chelsea has two industrial corridors. Historically, there used to be a few more. The other ones have largely been converted to housing. And, housing is a huge problem. So I don't worry about that as a land use. We're a small city, we're under 2 square miles, but we're very committed to maintaining our industrial base. And is a good chunk of our industrial base, as Jamal mentioned, is in a designated port area. Over the past 4 years, we wrote with community input and finally got approval from the state of a municipal harbor plan, which sets out the community's vision for its industrial waterfront. And the 2 priorities that came out of that community process were, one, public access, because currently Chelsea's surrounded on 3 sides by water, but it's very hard for our residents to ever see it. And 2 was increasing job density and increasing blue-collar job density. A lot of the development that's happened has not been for the types of people who live here. We now have the regional, New England regional FBI headquarters in Chelsea. And you can pretty much guarantee that almost no Chelsea resident works at the FBI. But so we use zoning a lot. We tend to allow uses in industrial zones by special permit so that we can work more with the developer and understand better what their vision is and help to mold that to the needs of our residents. We do have 200,000 square foot plus industrial warehouses in our pipeline right now. Each will be a 3-tenant building. So that's part of our expansion work. And we're continuing to seek and encourage any kind of business that can change some of the work dynamics, because currently, I forget what the number is, over 15,000 people who live in Chelsea leave the city to go to work. And another 15,000 come from outside Chelsea to work in Chelsea. And it's only about 2,000 of our residents, at least according to the census, who actually live and work in the city. So we'd like to change some of those dynamics, and that involves welcoming and encouraging businesses who will employ our local population.
Thank you, Carl. Just a quick clarifying question. When you mentioned the use of special permit in some cases, is that for industrial zoned land, and is it for non-industrial types of uses or any type of use?
It varies by use category. There are some uses that are allowed by right, but within our industrial and light industrial zones and our business zones, they tend to be allowed by special permit.
Thank you. Jamal, coming back to you, could you share a little bit your reflections? What stands out to you as the primary reasons to preserve industrial lands, and what might be some challenges in doing so?
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary reasons are kind of precisely those that have been echoed already in here. I think kind of one, to get it out of the way for some people who will try and make kind of like a land economics argument, is that yes, you can probably get more by converting this to housing in ways, but also too, we find that industrial land rents are continuing to rise up and that vacancy remains consistently low. And there's an interesting contradiction in the way that some people want to, again, they want to frame industrial work as being like either entirely inappropriate for urban areas or absent, right? These jobs have left and they're never coming back. But then you go to these industrial parks and there's no vacancy to be found, right? So there's a clear demand for these uses. The jobs there are generally of higher quality, especially for people who do not have a college degree, although although that gap has been shrinking in the past couple of years with a rather strong job market, right? So, to me, there are compelling labor market and land market reasons why you want to at least to try to be able to preserve your existing set of industrial land there. And then
Challenges.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So, the primary challenge, I think, just to get it out there, is the fact that we face a housing crisis in every metro area in the country right now. And frankly, industrial land is politically easy to convert to housing, right? Um, you know, uh, Regions or even cities are not going to go into single family residential areas, particularly with higher income folks, and say, hey, this is now going to be here for row homes or apartments, or going into that because of the nasty political fight that's there, right? So industrial land ends up being generally the least protected asset of land that can be converted to housing, right? And again, if you are in an area that has been entirely disinvested, and your industrial land vacancy is 10, 15, 20%, sure, right? There does not seem to be any kind of signal that there's a demand for those spaces. But again, that's not the case in the vast majority of places, and certainly not within and certainly not within the MAPC study space, right? So that question of trade-offs and where you're going to put new housing and grow new housing is a very vital one, and really, really important and very timely. And frankly, a lot of places have kind of taken an easy way out, and allowing the chipping away at their existing industrial parcels for housing, instead of going through the hard work, of communicating to their, of trying to communicate to their residents that, hey, more people should be allowed to live here, and we're going to have to try and accommodate that space.
Thank you, Jamal. Really well said that there can be competing public aims, and how to make sure that our policies are not inadvertently sacrificing one or the other. Tori, coming back to you, could you share a little bit more? You mentioned about having 200 employees. Wow, congratulations, a growing company. But could you share a little bit who is employed at the company? What types of opportunities do these jobs provide? Help fill that picture in.
Yeah, sure. So we have a lot of, as Camille had listed, she said workers without college degrees, workers with English as their second language, and workers of color. So that's our workforce, and that's who we employ. The jobs range from warehouse order pickers, to truck drivers, to management, inventory control. But it hasn't, moving food is fun, but really the fun part for me is getting to see employees that kind of will start I used to take orders at night, and I would have Omar, our night manager, and he had come from Honduras and had amnesty after an earthquake when I was much younger than I am now. And Omar now is our inventory control manager, and I've watched him get various jobs and be trained, and he has many stories like that. So it's people that join the family, and they want to do for their family, and they want to learn, and that they very much have career paths, and it's really that's my workforce. So that's really why we want to be in Boston and continue making those jobs. And I was sad to leave Newmarket Square, but thank God we could find a bigger spot and make more jobs. But yeah, those are our people, and it's been like that for the entirety of the company.
That's great. Do you have any insights on what's maybe sparks an employee to consider steps to advance in your company? Or
usually it's us. So I feel like we can sort of see the spark a lot. You've been around long enough, and you can see someone that's kind of interested, or really is working on their English. I'll get pulled aside all the time, and people I'll practice my Spanish, or they'll practice their English with me. And it's you can just see the drive in people, and people that want to do more, and people that are curious and want to learn. And I'm like, yes, what do you want? It's the best thing is to promote from within and not have to keep going. It's that is the dream, to be able to find somebody that is there, them, they show up, they want to do a good job, and they want more for themselves. So that's completely, those are the types of workers that we love. And it's pretty, I hope it's cultural at this point at Katz Rubis, because people, have such camaraderie, and they can see like, oh, Omar's done this, or Angel's now a truck driver, he's got his CDL. And we encourage that. Like, we want them to get education. We don't want them just to be a van driver. We want people to be able to, make more money and do better for themselves. So I think now it's sort of, we have enough examples that people, they see the path, right? Like, you don't have to trust me, just look at your peers. So that's sort of how I feel like it's pretty well known at the company that that's what we want, and that's what other people see. Like, I love sending out those, or getting the promotion emails, or reading about people that are in the company and telling their story. So I think that's probably the best way. It's not a poster in the break room. I will tell you that.
Yeah. Wow, not a poster in the break room. And then CDL being a commercial driver's license, which there's a process to get one of those. We have another question for you, Carl.
Please.
Similar to my question to Tori, I'm interested to hear about anything that you might know about Chelsea's industrial workforce. Who's employed in some of these industrial companies, and what opportunities do these jobs provide?
Yeah, so Chelsea's a city of immigrants, and it pretty much always has been. Next year, we celebrate or commemorate the 400th year of settlement. Chelsea was the first settlement on Boston Harbor. But census believes there are about 40,000 people living in our 2 square miles. The reality is it's probably somewhat over 50,000. We have a lot of people who avoid being counted. And so the statistics we get out of the Census Bureau are somewhat skewed. But even with those statistics, the median income in Chelsea is roughly about half what it is in Greater Boston. So people are struggling. And on the chart at the beginning, you were talking about an annual wage in industrial locations of 40,000. So, 40,000 at, 30% ideal spending on housing means you're paying $1,000 a month. There is nothing to rent for $1,000 a month. So either you're working multiple jobs, or several people in your household are working multiple jobs. Those aren't living wages for Greater Boston. So we still have people arriving daily. Over the past month or so, we track the unemployment new filings, and they've about doubled. The increase has been almost entirely in people without a high school diploma. 80%, roughly 80% of our population does not have a college degree. Almost 50% were born outside the US. So we're, trying to find ways to get them jobs, and we struggle with that. We don't want them to feel forced to relocate, because the jobs are now, up in ex-urban areas, but we also don't want to burden them with 2.5 hours of commuting every day. So to the extent that we can find employers, and we're willing to work with anyone to try and create the right balance here.
Great. Thank you for utilizing some of those statistics to really paint really a true picture. We're talking about human beings. People are not just workers. They need a place to live, a community, a sense of community, and the realities of getting around our region. So thank you so much for painting that picture for us, Carl. Coming back to you, Jamal, what strategies have you seen other cities perhaps use to preserve or kind of think about their industrial lands and businesses? And if you happen to know anything about any of the regulations in Massachusetts, that would be great too.
Yeah, so on that end, it's been a little while since I've seen any updated studies, but I think in the report, the coverage of the London plan, I think is a really fascinating one, especially because the London land market is just it's beyond anything, right? That that we can try to be able to imagine there. Like I think on the individual parcel level, I think the rise of multi-story industrial buildings. This has been increasingly the norm in the Pacific Rim, where space is a lot more precious in areas, but there's also very vibrant manufacturing and industrial fields, right? The kind of like standard industrial building in the U.S. for about the past half century, has been the kind of like sprawling single story on a green field, right? And as we face continued spatial constraints, we need to think about building up. Seattle recently opened up their first multi-story warehouse that actually has trucks going on multiple levels and moving in and out there. In Portland, Oregon, where I did some work in their industrial sanctuaries. They do not have FAR restrictions on industrial spaces. So it is possible to build up for industrial uses. So, those are kind of some more like specific areas where if folks are looking to try and like tweak their codes, or if they're thinking about alternative designs, just kind of like allowing industry to build up where that is appropriate and possible, I think is one way to try and juice what space that we have left. Again, beyond that, like in the cities, it's either a combination of just having like much more strict rules, such as just saying, hey, we have outright bans on residential, we have outright bans on commercial, we have outright bans on institutional uses, right? In Baltimore and the maritime industrial districts, they're very, very strict on that. And then again, there's also kind of like process oriented things. So in San Jose, they have a no net loss rule, where basically, for folks who are looking to try and redesignate a piece of land, they have to answer 4 questions to the Planning Commission, regarding the potential impacts on that end. They have to inform the surrounding neighbors and give them space to respond in kind. So there's a combination of like rules-based and process-based adaptations that are there. Kind of on a more basic level, really just really again like elevating the topic of industrial land as something that is important, and managing industrial land as a strategic asset is just something that like planning and planners have to do. And kind of like on a more political or popular imagination and like we need to be thinking about industrial work beyond manufacturing, and we need to be honest about the fact that we have lost a lot of our manufacturing capacity. Some of it is going to come back, probably not necessarily in the traditional places where it once was, but there's still a lot of work in the creation, moving, and modification of things, right? Food manufacturing and distribution remains huge and is still growing in a lot of cities, right? and the kind of like vibrant urban places, part of which is having, these very cool restaurant scenes or these consumption scenes, are really built upon having like really solid food distribution and food manufacturing systems, right? And that's never really talked about when people talk about these like really great restaurant scenes. They don't talk about how do you preserve the produce rows, right? They don't talk about, who are the middle institutions between the like farmers who are out there in the region, and how that produce actually gets to the restaurant itself, right? So even in these areas where cities have been trying to plan around and push, like around food and restaurants and things like that, the role of distributors and food manufacturers is still like absent, right? And certainly the issues they have with land are not at all present. So I think those are probably like 3 areas or cases that folks can try and think about and focus upon.
Really great provocative ideas. Thank you, Jamal. I think, Tori, you maybe, I see you sitting up ready to respond. Do you have any thoughts in response?
I just want
to
Jamal. Yeah. Jamal, just keep talking. I was going to say, I think until the pandemic, no one really knew that, like when everyone became acutely aware of when they couldn't get access to food, then they were like, and I was going to work and it's like, well, that's, you don't see me, but I'm dropping off the food at the dock that then goes on the shelves, So I feel like no one really thought about it until the pandemic, when it was like, the food workers were going back. But it's like, yeah, if we want all these restaurants, we want food fresh, we have to be able to move it in a cold chain correctly and store it. And we need workers to be able to do that. So no one really talks about that so eloquently about the food distribution. So thank you.
Jamal, you're making a case for a planner citizen urban dweller training academy or something, I think. Thank you. Coming back to you, Tori, can you talk a little bit back to your more now new local context within the Hyde Park community, which is this very vibrant, interesting part of Boston? But as you've, on commencing your move there, can you share anything about what efforts the company has made to be a good neighbor to the surrounding community, be that both how you operate your business and, operational considerations, or indeed any civic kind of community work that you might be doing? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So we are a 24-hour business, because restaurants, they, close at the end of the day, they place their orders, and then we have people working through the night that are loading the trucks. We quickly realized in New Market Square, we didn't have residential neighbors. It was all industrial. And in Hyde Park, one corner parcel of our land did have a neighborhood. So we never put our trucks that run reefers at night near that parking lot. They come as close to the warehouse as possible. And we have strategically line up those trucks that have to be refrigerated at night, so that the noise is just not affecting the neighborhood as much as possible. Litter is a very big issue in industrial parks, making sure they're clean. In the food service world, you have very strict food safety policies, so cleaning up is a big part of our job anyways. So making sure that throughout the day, the areas are kept clean, and that that's trying to be respectful. Well, it's what we need for our business, but also for neighbors. And then just training, because, we have cars that are coming and truck drivers that are coming down through the residential area onto our Meadow Road. So it's making sure that everyone is a good neighbor, that, not just the people within the building, but the people coming back and forth too. So during COVID, we had an awesome opportunity. When you're being told you're an essential worker, you get to be this like foot soldier, and you're bringing food to people. So we were able to connect the Hyde Park Food Pantry with the USDA programs that we were working with to move food to those food insecure. So we would do about 3,000 pounds a week of produce to the Hyde Park Food Pantry through the USDA. So definitely trying to be a good neighbor and being able to be one of those responders at that time as well.
Great, thank you for that. And Carl Allen, again, with the Chelsea lens, do you have any insights or perhaps any information about how Chelsea's industrial base figures into the broader regional economy? I know that's a big question, but I just was curious if you had a sense of, in some ways, Tori's company is feeding, sorry for the metaphor, a larger ecosystem, but wondered if you had any sort of comparable stories for Chelsea.
Sure. Chelsea is home to the New England Produce Center, which is the largest private market terminal in the country. And most of New England's fresh produce spends a little time, hopefully very little, in Chelsea as it gets transshipped. So that's a huge piece of our local economy. And to look at its kind of regional impact, we also pitched to the MPO this past year a study to look at freight decarbonization, so that we can start to prepare heavy trucks and mid-sized trucks are going to be the hardest parts of our transportation ecosystem to get off diesel. And so we want to start thinking about that and figure out how to go about encouraging it. We're also the home for Eastern Salt, which brings in most of the road salt for Massachusetts and beyond into New York State, all of the New England states. And so we see a lot of truck traffic in winter as various DPWs come in, and they tend to not have a lot of capacity for stockpiling salt. So it all gets stockpiled on our waterfront and then gets distributed during the course of the winter. So, I guess finally, traffic is always an issue. Industrial uses tend to be less of a parking problem. It's more of a traffic problem, and and I think our residents are much more focused on parking issues than they are about the truck traffic, which, we tend to confine to a couple of roads within the city. And, we have 2 bridges over to East Boston, which gives us pretty easy access to the airport. So there's a lot of reason to move freight that's high value through here.
Wow, great points about the kind of locational attributes that could be the building blocks for, strategically managing, as Jamal is saying, your industrial assets and preserving them. Very interesting thoughts. I was wondering if you've seen any kind of those, what people, I guess, refer to somewhat cool industrial uses, like Camille shared with us, the breweries or those kinds of things that maybe coexist in.
No, they're all over in Everett. But no,
not far, not too far from me.
No, you can walk there. No, there's the uncool ones. We've told Amazon twice that they're not welcome.
Let's see, thank you very much. Okay, I think unless did anyone of the panelists care to chime in on anything that you've heard from your colleagues, and then we will now be able to turn to a few questions from the audience, but just wanted to quickly open up if any of you had some thoughts in response to your fellow panelists. Okay. So coming back, I think we have some comments from the chat. Oh, wait, sorry. Here are some questions. Let's see here. Thank you so much, Jesse. I echo Kristen Anderson, first question to Camille, in wondering how to reach planning departments and redevelopment boards. In Arlington, they are so focused on residential development for many good reasons at the cost of our rapidly shrinking industrial districts. So speaking the language of planning departments and redevelopment boards, I would add even planning committees. That might be a good one for you, Carl, and or for you, Jamal.
You know, we're always happy to talk with residents and understand their viewpoints. When projects come up, we encourage public participation. Major developments like a new industrial warehouse, we would hold public meetings within the neighborhood, get people's feedback. But, you know, wherever you are, you know, if you're having trouble accessing the planning department, you know, the boards are harder because they tend to be all volunteers. But, you know, the paid professional staff should be willing to talk to you. And, you know, here our city manager, who regretfully left last month, was always open to talking to residents, and he would engage with us in conversations, and definitely promoted the maintenance of industrial corridors as a policy. And if your leaders aren't doing that, you know, they need to hear from you.
Right.
Otherwise, they think what they're doing is great.
Jamal, the language of the planning departments and redevelopment boards, or working with the all volunteer planning councils. Committees.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, I just want to echo all the stuff that Carl said there. I would say also, you know, we just had this great report that came out talking about the value of industrial land and talking about different strategies and things like that, right? Like, you know, getting that report out to your local planning agencies, you know, having local newspapers or radio affiliates like covering it, you know, like just doing a push to get the narrative out there and helping to start that conversation. You know, I think is a really powerful way of especially getting political leadership to pay attention, in addition to the professional staff at the departments there, you know. So, you know, I think also the role of MAPC as a convener and thought leader and kind of like framer in this space, I think is rather important. And also too, you know, a potentially more oblique way is looking at either local or regional business associations, departments of departments of economic development, and chambers of commerce, right? You know, like there are people there who have interests aligned, you know, like around the expansion and preservation of industrial land, but they're not necessarily very well organized as of yet at the local level, right? So, you know, I think using this report as kind of like a jumping off piece or as a reference piece in which you can be able to make your case is incredibly valuable there. And also too, it's something that I can assign my students when I rail about the importance of industrial land. You know, there are not many reports, certainly of this size, that are, you know, like less than a decade old now. You know, so when I talk about it, I can say, hey, here's like a timely thing and it matters, and we're moving forward on that.
Great.
Actually, one thing I would add to Jamal's list is CBOs, community-based organizations. And we have some wonderful CBOs in the city of Chelsea, and we talk to them a lot to kind of understand their members' concerns and to work through with them why job creation and job density are important to a livable city.
Great, great, thank you. I see from my colleague, Camille Jonlin, that she's been asked to answer a question as well. So Camille, maybe we can have you come off mute.
Yes, yeah. Thanks, everyone. So there was a question about, does anyone have experience successfully incentivizing a mixed-use industrial typology through zoning regulations? I think that's a great question, and I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any thoughts on that. But there's also a report by the Urban Manufacturing Alliance that with support from Mass Development that studied several Massachusetts towns and has some really good examples of exactly that. So I'll put, it's in our report as well, but I'll put a link to that here right now. Do any of the panelists have any thoughts on that too?
Not on that specific thing, but I wanted to follow up on Carl's last point. Well, one, I did want to mention the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, definitely as an org that is like very, very vital in the space, certainly on a national level, but as you just pointed out, it also has a local footprint here too. I would also include other labor orgs, in particular unions and workforce development agencies, as other folks who are in there, right? There are dire staffing shortages in many of the skilled trades and in all kinds of industrial work. Getting advocates for that kind of work to also say, hey, there's a demand for this work. We have to be able to make space for it, right? So we have to be able to make space for people. We have to be able to make space for these jobs, and we have to be able to make space to, to be able to allow for flourishing there.
Right. Thank you. Mark Drazen has asked a question. Executive Director of MAPC asked the following. I would ask on behalf of the more suburban listeners who are on this webinar, what strategies they can use to preserve varied industrial uses, particularly along Route 195, which is kind of our outermost beltway, especially in the face of tremendous pressure for warehouse and delivery space by big companies like the Amazon and other companies that have been mentioned. So anything for those more varied industrial uses and more of those, as you put it, Jamal, kind of more like the greenfield sites, but what can we do? What tools can we use?
Build housing for the workers.
Interesting. So preserving the jobs and combining that with a strategy for housing and affordability. Yes, is that where you're headed?
Yeah.
Great. Any particular land use tools? I don't know if zoning can be so fine point to sort of say manufacturing, production, repair only, not distribution.
Sure.
Can you do that? I don't know.
You can be as granular as you want. But, we recently, not in our industrial zone, but the area just north of it, created a mixed use overlay district where you can combine housing, retail, commercial, light industrial, however you want, as long as you meet some expanded affordable housing provisions. And we give density bonuses for increasing the amount of affordability.
Great, thank you. And then another question in the chat, it comes from our own Travis Pollock in the transportation department. It seems that the industrial uses are shifting geographically. Do we have examples of what businesses and others are doing to connect workers to these jobs, especially for those who perhaps don't have access to a car regularly?
You need to expand the T.
Yes. Indeed.
But no, that is a big problem, that if you push the jobs out to the exurbs, people need to get there, and that means they're going to need cars because there aren't really alternatives.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing that I've been inspired by is, and without knowing too much of the detail, but we do hear through this bipartisan infrastructure law that's passed at the federal level, that there were examples shared in a recent webinar of multimodal transportation projects that one can be pretty creative with some of these grants to, again, support alternate transportation alternatives and making a more robust transportation network so that it can combine van share or some kind of company supported method, first mile, last mile, with public transit, with bike, with ped, with other options. So just a little plug for us all to be looking. That's a 5-year initiative of funding coming from the federal government down to states and localities. Any other thoughts on that score as to creatively responding to some extent to the geographic dispersion of industrial?
Yeah, I think part of that is just kind of what we've been discussing about today, which is basically like preserving and expanding available industrial space in areas where there's demand for industry, right? I mean, again, like in these interregional, inner suburban areas, again, like there's immense demand for industrial spaces. The rents are growing at a fast clip, and the vacancies they are staying low, right? I mean, like it's a clear market signal from industrial users that they want to be more central, right? So a way to try and like limit that sprawl is that you have to make space, right? And that remains the kind of like hard problem that we need to figure out there. We absolutely need to improve our regional transportation systems. We absolutely need to try and figure out ways to make it such that people can like live well and safely and work without having access to a car. But one way to do that is to grow jobs in areas that are already well served by existing transit.
Thank you for that. So we can be a little bit more intentional and a little bit more strategic where those industrial growth strategies can go to go where there's transportation access. So it's interesting. In the comments, we had a couple of interesting comments. Abby Swain from the EPA speaking about the EPA Smart Wave Freight Partnership Program that's promoting a variety of strategies that perhaps could be of import here. Alexa Pinard of the Boston Planning and Development Agency encourages folks to really reach out to your municipality's planners for Boston's new markets planning process. They really utilize the input of some of the industrial land users that might be familiar to you, Tori, back in the day. So that's another note of encouragement. Zhangwei Tomi, sorry if I'm butchering your name, my apologies. Unlike land use planning, transportation planning occurs at the regional or state levels. In order to improve transportation and increase transit to serve existing and upcoming industrial areas, the Commonwealth must take the lead to increase transportation resources, but individual municipalities in the same regions still ought to work together to pool resources. Very interesting thought. Thank you so much. Abby, further, some state agencies are looking that if you want to look into e-trucks, I guess that's more clean transportation options, right? There's a link provided for that. So thank you so much. John Sisson from Newton, working on this issue, and please bookmark, and you shared a website. Thank you. So keep them coming. Please put your comments and questions in the chat. We will be saving all this material. And I think we are approaching time. How am I doing, Camille?
Yeah, it's 3:20.
Okay, great. Oh, so we still have another few minutes if we need it. Let's just see here. Just sharing these in case any of our panelists have reactions. Tabor Chiali, several large food prep manufacturing, such as Agar, and frozen food distributors left Boston during the Big Dig and took advantage of significantly lower electrical costs in Taunton, which is an area headed down towards our south coast outside of the MAPC region. Lower housing costs in Taunton for their employees. Anyone want to comment? More dispersion even outside the MAPC region.
Yeah, I know in that.
Does that leave an opening for you, Tori?
I was just going to say, in the Agar example, they were very warmly welcomed because they had, I think, 500-ish employees at that point. And they saw something I haven't seen in Boston, but like also they really expedited the process for them to move and really accommodated them. So it made it very easy for them to leave Boston and go down there and rebuild. At that point, there's a number of them that did that, but that was, it seemed as a 20-year-old from what I saw that Taunton was really set up to do that as well. They were really motivating businesses to make things easier and expand.
Are you speaking of primarily the land use and permitting and things like that, or physically moving?
I've now built only one building, but it was a box in a box. It wasn't a whole new building. And what we have quite a few Agar former employees. So their timelines looked a lot different than mine to get an occupation and, to be able to get permitting. So there's a lot a city can do to try to give somebody a warm welcome or not that Boston hasn't, but they were very welcoming in their process to expedite.
So possibilities for reforming, updating those review, ISD permitting, inspectional services department and permitting procedures in a way, particularly for these strategic assets and these strategic companies, perhaps.
Yeah, we tend to do that. You can, get projects through the city in a couple of months. The problem is the MAPC process and what state approvals you're going to need. And they just changed all of their regulations, so the process is even more onerous in environmental justice communities, which is kind of counter to the outcomes we would hope for.
Well, with that, I am just so delighted with this conversation today. Maybe virtually, people can just say a big thank you to our panel. We do have a couple of more minutes, a couple more housekeeping matters for you, but we're extremely pleased to have had Professor of City and Regional Planning, Jamal Green, Katsaribas Brothers co-owner Tori Katsaribas-Stam, fourth generation co-owner of a dynamic food distribution company in Boston, and City of Chelsea Economic Development Planner Carl Allen. Thank you so much. And I'm going to now turn it back to Katherine Antos for a brief closing.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Camille, Angela, Jamal, Tori, and Carl for today's presentation and rich discussion that captured the academic, business owner, and city planner perspectives. Jamal, of course, I appreciate you identifying the role of regional planning agencies to conduct research and to convene. But honestly, on the convening point, that wouldn't be possible without all of you in the audience for attending and for your excellent questions, dialogue, and resources that you shared in the chat. So as Camille noted and Angela noted, and also as you can see in the chat, the report is now available on our Metro Common 2050 website, and that is metrocommon.mapc.org. So again, thank you to everyone for joining today for this rich discussion, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars.